I mix what I like, what I like.
I mix what I like is exactly where you want and need to be. I mix what I like organic, vegan, soul food from your immediate diet. Live healthy.
I mix what I like, what I
We're
like.
here on I Mix What I Like. You may check us out on imixwhatilike.org, where you can see all these other shows and what my daddy likes and other cool things.
Yes, what's up, world? Welcome to I Mix What I Like live right here on Black Liberation Media for our continuing series, 100 Years of Malcolm X, culminating next week with some special guests to celebrate the 100th birthday of Malcolm X. And yes, we are finally live again. Welcome, everybody. Happy Monday morning. I hope all is relatively well. Please do like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon on your way in. And remember, if you are not already aware, this is a great time and to reconnect with Patreon, to join Patreon, if for no other reason. Crew. Interesting. So it's not sharing. And now I'm having connection issues again. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Not sure what the situation could possibly be. All right, everybody. My apologies. I hope this is now going to be a solved issue. Please do welcome yourselves and myself back, and let folks know that we are endeavoring to go ahead and move on here. Really don't understand what is going on. Um, yeah, but I do apologize. Everything on this end, I really don't. Yeah, so. But we're going to continue to press on through again with our 100 years of Malcolm X celebration here at I Mix What I Like. I do have my AAPRP Africa Must Unite t-shirt fresh out the package. Yep. That AAPRP drip. Get yourselves ready for the summer. Absolutely. And the birds are out there doing their thing. That's it. It's a beautiful morning so far over here in the mid-Atlantic of the United States. I hope at minimum, wherever you are and whenever you see this, you are enjoying some relatively good weather and good vibes, despite how difficult I understand that is these days. Yeah, somewhere between YouTube and StreamYard, because and just for the record, even ever since I was doing Salute to Radio CPR, unsanctioned low power FM radio, whether I was, doing mixtapes or whatever and trying to learn my ways through all of this stuff. At minimum, I've always done the best I could to check the tech and be prepared and have everything set. So when things don't work like that, it's frustrating, but not due to a lack of effort on my end. So again, I apologize, everybody, and I really don't know. That's yeah, I'm not clear. What? Let me see something here. Yeah, I guess I still have mine. I don't know what happened. I don't know. I did not do it. Just for the record. So, yeah, there was nothing that why are okay, I see what I see. All right. All right, everybody. Everybody chill in the chat this morning. Didn't I set the subscriber settings? So I'm let's relinquish the all caps. Let's take a step back. The show just started, and maybe turn your attention up here. Don't join the live just to be in the chat causing nonsense. So Prezi Valentine, chill. I'll just talk to you directly for a moment. Let's chill. Let's reset. Like I had to reset the show. Let's everybody reset. Take a deep breath. The focus today is Malcolm X related politics, and specifically, as I'm going to get to in a little bit, the sort of the coup de grace, the coup de grace, as Fred Sanford used to say, which is relevant because Red Fox is going to be mentioned this morning. Is a focus on this great article that I found this week and enjoyed reading, belatedly, admittedly, about Black women revolutionaries who informed and made major impact, unheralded impact on Malcolm X. So let's recenter and focus on that. And yeah. Okay, Monty, still got yours. Okay. Good. All right. Again, welcome everybody. Apologies once more, but let's press on. Let me get my notes back up here. And please do, by the way, everybody, if you haven't already, like, share, subscribe, put this in your socials, support the Patreon if you can. Again, as I attempted to mention, want to one more time promote, or once again, because not just one more time, continue to promote our Patreon. A great way to support this evolving and ever improving, wonderful and seminal effort that is Black Liberation Media. But I specifically want to promote this Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern, the review crew plus special guests will be having a full roundtable on sinners. Sinners will be judged. So you can join us live via Patreon, 2 p.m. Eastern, Wednesday. Please do. Special guests joining the full review crew. And I cannot wait. All right. Please do go back and check Saturdays with Renee and the great show that was had then and there. Please also go back. That's not my intent to do the thumbs down. Sorry about that. In fact, it's a thumbs up for Saturdays with Renee and all the programming here at Black Liberation Media that has did you all see F the Signifier with Dr. Chajiwa the other night? Did you all see Jackie breaking down fascism the other day? Did you all see the full week of remixes last week? Did you see LSR episode 3.7 streamed a couple days ago? I had caught up a little bit with Dare to Struggle, Dare to Win. I was catching up a little bit with In Search of Black Power and the Leaders of Beautiful Struggle crew the other day, and salute to them as well. So there's all kinds of dope programming. Make sure you have the bell rung. All right. Once again, all respect
You just
to
don't read, beloved,
for inspiring this series. And let's you know what? I think a good way to sort of reset is to let Malcolm speak for himself. I was perusing the channel of Paul Lee, the legendary historian and historian of Malcolm X, and found this clip. Thought we could start here. And before we move on, again, we will be focusing eventually as the centerpiece this morning on this wonderful article that is new to me, focusing on the Black women revolutionaries that helped mold and evolve and elevate the political consciousness of Malcolm X. But speaking of that political consciousness, let's revisit.
The one mistake that has been made in the struggle of the oppressed against the oppressor is it has been factionalized too much, too many factions. You've got downtown factions, uptown factions, crosstown factions, and some basement factions. And instead of them having any degree of coordination toward a common objective, usually they are divided and spend a lot of time or dissipate a lot of time either being suspicious of each other or knocking at each other or outright fighting each other. Whereas you have black people in Harlem who are militant, they don't go for white people downtown too much, no matter how militant they are. Now, the blacks who come downtown and mix with the whites who are militant usually don't even know how to talk to the blacks who are still uptown. There's far apart. I hate to bring this out, but it's true. I've noticed it from observation. You have all types of people who are fed up with what's going on. You have whites who are fed up. You have blacks who are fed up. The whites who are fed up can't come uptown too easy, because uptown is more fed up than anybody else. And they are fed up, so that it's not so easy to come uptown. Whereas the blacks uptown who come downtown usually are the type, who almost lose their identity. They lose their soul, so to speak. so that they are not in a position to serve as a bridge between the militant whites and the militant blacks. That type can't do it. I hate to hit him like that, but it's true. He has lost his identity. He's lost his feeling. And usually, play it cool, please. He has actually lost his contact with Harlem himself, so that he serves no purpose. He's almost rootless. He's not uptown and he's not fully downtown. So when the day comes, wherein the whites who are really fed up, I don't mean these jive whites who pose as liberals and who are not, but those who are fed up with what is going on, when they learn how to really establish the proper type of communication with those uptown who are fed up, and they get some coordinated action going, you'll get some change. You'll get some change. And it will take both. It will take everything that you got. It will take that. But how many sitting here right now feel that they could truly identify with a struggle that was designed to eliminate the basic causes that create the conditions that exist? Not very many. They can jive. But when it comes to identifying yourself with a struggle that is not endorsed by the power structure, that is not acceptable, that the ground rules are not laid down by the society in which you live and which you're struggling against, you can't identify with that. You step back. Oh, when things get bad enough, then everybody gets into the act. And that's what's coming in 1965.
I think everybody already knows what it is. And
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
I should have written my thesis on Malcolm X. So one of the things, that's funny you said that. So I'm not going to lie and suggest I'm prepared for it today. But I have started reading this book that I'm late. I only learned about a few months ago. This 2003 book, which I'm really enjoying, by Russell Rickford, about Betty Shabazz surviving Malcolm X. And I think it's in here, or maybe in the other article that I was looking at, where, Betty wrote her own thesis on the educational component of the OAAU. And I did not know that. I've forgotten it, never focused on it, and I would like to see about finding it if it hasn't already been published in some other form, and looking at it. And if anyone has already done that, or let me rephrase that, if any of you already know who has already done that and want to share that, please let me know. Because of course, one of the points that we've been covering here that will come up again today is that so much of the discussion of Malcolm X does not involve, by design, his last political organizational effort, the OAAU, so that Betty would have done her own thesis on it, and that itself not be part of the discussion of her, Once upon a time, many, many, many years ago, not with this level of specificity, but I was having a one of many loving, friendly discussions about the efficacy of the Divine Nine. And, because a lot of them like to claim various revolutionaries. And of course, Betty was a Delta. And I was having a discussion with one or another of members of that community and raised the question, so rather than simply claim her and name check her, what are you all actually doing to raise up her life and work? Now, given the context, it probably didn't go over well, and all due respect to the late great Dr. Betty Shabazz. She deserved a better supporter or defender in the moment. But somewhere in where what I was saying is a kernel of truth. But anyway, one of the sections that I was enjoying in here so far was just reading and her side of Malcolm's travels. So like when Malcolm is, so we've been talking about Malcolm traveling in Africa and the so-called Middle East. We'll be doing that a little more today. She's talking about in here, or this section that I was looking at is talking about how she would receive those letters and how she would engage them with their daughters, and how they would put a map on the wall or the refrigerator, and she would show the girls, this is where your father is, and this is where he's going, and this is what he's doing. And also importantly, as will come up in one of what we'll look at, is that she talks about Malcolm in a way that Marable does not, in terms of the quality of their relationship, which now obviously there are those who would say, well, she would obviously be more likely to shade the truth, but than an objective historian. But we're going to come back to that point too. So, but I do encourage people to check this out if you haven't. Again, Surviving Malcolm X by Russell Rickford, with a foreword by Merle Evers Williams, by the way, which is itself a fascinating read. Just a short reflection on how the two women knew each other, obviously shared a similar horrific history, and but yeah, so. And perhaps more on that too, because by the way, even as we culminate this series next Monday and move on and involve other things, I don't think it's ever inappropriate to have a sort of sustained discussion of some of this. And the series for me personally has been great in just each week demanding that I focus some time to finding research and reading about Malcolm, which is pretty dope. And there's so much. Speaking of which, one thing I just wanted to quickly shout out and reference as we eagerly await a book this author is coming out with in a few weeks on the history of Robert and Mabel Williams, Professor Akinyele Omowale Umoja, and we will shoot back. If folks haven't, you should obviously check this book out. And one of the what I just wanted to highlight just for this morning in the book was in terms of Malcolm's ongoing impact, the Malcolm X doctrine and the Republic of New Africa, which I thought is pretty interesting. Just to go back and look at Free the Land, Mississippi Freedom Struggle, and the Republic of New Africa. the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa was formed in late March of 1968. Two brothers, Milton and Richard Henry, were leaders of the Malcolm X Society in Detroit. So there's already, and here you see Robert Williams and Mabel Williams and Gaidi Obadeli and Amari Obadeli, who are the names taken by the brothers. But just because we mentioned I think it was last week when we talked about the OAAU and Malcolm's engagement with the idea of urban guerrilla warfare and armed struggle and the relationship of the Revolutionary Action Movement to that. Some of that comes up in here because all of them are all of those satellite efforts become part of the PGRNA, which demanded, among other things, 5 states be relinquished to its authority in the southern part of the United States as part of reparations that were due to the Black nation for centuries of exploitation and degradation. They talked about urban Black people moving to the South for zones of refuge, to develop paramilitary training in order to defend the Republic of New Africa, and what would be considered the Malcolm X doctrine of developing a Black liberation underground. So the Black underground, commonly called the Black Liberation Army, was very active in the late 60s and 1970s. The PGRNA claimed no control of the BLA or other underground radical formations, but hoped Black clandestine units in northern urban centers would provide a disruptive or second strike capacity if the RNA were attacked. Obadeli's strategy was labeled the Malcolm X doctrine. So as will come up even this morning, as folks continue to want to ever rebrand Malcolm, because again, his presence is still, even 100 years later, or at least since his birth, but clearly his symbol, his memory is still too strong and connected to a radicalism that, if left unchecked, those in power are, I think, still worried. So there's this constant need to discuss him and rebrand him, and these are the aspects of all histories, but particularly those connected to Malcolm X, that will continuously be suppressed. So I think it's always good to be reminded of how others perceived and engaged Malcolm and his work. I also liked being reminded of that passage because, for me, one of the struggles I have intellectually, and I don't know if anyone else, to the extent others struggle with this, when I do try to consider even the contemporary versions of the desire, the nationalist desire, is the question of defense and its relationship to the broader dominant empire. But that answers or addresses in part one of those concerns that I have and think about. That is the second strike question, which is an interesting, there's consideration for the isolation of that evolving nation. So again, salute to We Will Shoot Back, and those unsanctioned memories of Malcolm. Okay, so I don't think I remembered to play it last week. So, and if I did, it's still worthy of another of a replay. But I did clip part of a discussion we had, and I'm still reading through it, the new book by Garrett Felber on Martin Sostre. And so, and when he was on with Saturdays with Renee, or when they were on with Saturdays with Renee, a week ago Saturday, I raised this question about Martin Solstre's relationship to Malcolm, and this is how it went. I just wanted to pick up on what you just said there, and admittedly, I am thinking about this weekly series I've been doing on 100 Years of Malcolm X, and I in reading this interview that you did with Truth Out that Renee sent me earlier, because I don't know much about Sostre, so this is all fascinating. I've already pre-ordered your book. I'm looking forward to I've only been learning about him at all over these last few years, to be honest, just recently. But in that interview, it is mentioned that that it's Sostre's work in the Nation of Islam while in prison as a jailhouse lawyer that he reaches out to Malcolm X. And initially, when it's brought up in the interview, I was a little bit worried because we don't get to read of Malcolm's response immediately. So it's for a second I thought, oh man, I hope Malcolm didn't miss the letter or ignore the letter or whatever. And thankfully, as you point out, he did not. If it's not too much of a detour, could you talk about, because I know this is part of Martin's development, somewhat politically and somewhat like Malcolm's. Could you talk a little bit about their interaction and to whatever extent they had a relationship? Could you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish I knew more about the intricacies of whether they corresponded with one another, how the mentorship happened. But Martin was basically part of a group of incarcerated Muslims at Clinton and Attica during the late 50s, early 60s, who were being persecuted for their organizing and religious beliefs, and who, really led by Martin's jailhouse lawyering, were filing these cases that were first ostensibly around access to the Quran and things like that, and then second about sort of the punishment that they were undergoing for their religious beliefs about solitary, the loss of good time. But historically at that time, imprisoned people have no constitutional rights. So to sort of access any of these rights, it's really actually raising a much larger question about, do imprisoned people have constitutional rights? And that's the broader context that they were asking Malcolm then to come to Buffalo and testify as an expert witness, because what the state was trying to do was say, this is not a legitimate religion. You know, this is in the parlance of today, right? They would say a threat group, terrorists. You know, at the time they were calling them a hate group. So it's the same tools that the state uses, right, to delegitimize, you know, liberation struggles and say that these are hate groups. And so Malcolm goes and testifies in court in the case where Sostre is a plaintiff. And so there's actually this interesting kind of interaction where Sostre is testifying, and he gets himself into kind of some hot water when he's testifying, because he's pretty, he's not placating to the judge or anything like that. And Malcolm kind of has this exchange with him where he's like, oh, you know, basically like this person kind of is misunderstanding or misrepresenting Islam. And the reason, and I think it's strategic, right? Because Malcolm's saying, like, if he had better religious instruction, he would understand. And it's like, because that's what Malcolm's doing, right, is to say, well, what we need to do is actually be allowed, ministers need to be allowed to come into the prison. We need to send religious
And then he wouldn't be making these mistakes.
Exactly. Then he wouldn't be making these mistakes. And one of the other things that I just love about that story, and this comes up in Orasami Burton's book too, is that Malcolm was coming in as a Christian minister. So he would put on the garb and come in and say he was a Christian minister, and that's how they were getting the lessons in. So yeah, there's a fascinating history there.
You're welcome, Jared.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Renee and Garrett, for that. And then, yes, if I've seen this recommendation also. So yeah. But definitely I'm looking forward to reading more about Sostre, and that is kind of funny to think of Malcolm coming in with the, what is it? I don't know what you call it, but you know what I'm saying. The priestly outfit. That'd be kind of funny. So, all right. So, you know what? I have a couple other clips. And folks, before we again, we're still getting to the main course, so to speak. But one of the clips I have is one of my favorites. It's one of my favorites of all time, and we're only going to hear an excerpt of it. So just another little light foreshadowing and tease there. um in this discussion of who determines our memory of Malcolm. What will the narrative be? And uh but but in that vein, I mentioned Paul Lee a moment ago, and I was just going through his channel, and I found this other clip, this classic interview he gave in 1990 with Charlene Hunter Galt. Some of us, this will be a flashback of sorts for some of us, but in some way, much like the centerpiece of our discussion that's to come, the question of, again, how are we being encouraged to remember Malcolm in the frame? And in this part of the interview, and I'll make sure to put the links to all of these in the show description, the Lee is talking about the forever juxtaposition of Malcolm against Martin. And I thought this part of the interview was much like all of it, very interesting. But so let's just check this part out here.
Things that I've read is that there was a strategy. I don't know if it actually existed, but that Malcolm X used to say that he deliberately was as radical as he was in order to help Martin Luther King get his program advanced.
Most of the focus on Malcolm and Dr. King has been on their personal opinion of each other and their personal relationship. They only, in fact, met one time. What they have missed is what you're alluding to. That is, they worked almost hand in glove on a tactical level. Dr. King would, for instance, create these crisis scenarios in Birmingham or St. Augustine and Selma. And Malcolm would use the injustices created by these scenarios to help push forth his indictment of America. At the same time, Dr. King was able to use Malcolm's extremist image to say, look, unless you give me concessions, this man is waiting in the wings.
There are those who study both the life of Martin Luther King and the life of Malcolm X who say that they represented different demographic poles, that Martin Luther King was the man of the Deep South, that Malcolm X was the man of the urban North. Is that a correct analysis of where they were in their time?
I think you're right. I think that they did represent different constituencies. As much as they spoke to different constituencies, I think your point is well taken. They represented them. Malcolm sprung from the northern urban experience and represented it well. Dr. King likewise sprung from the southern, more rural experience and represented as well as spoke for that. They did represent different aspects of Black American culture in the same way that Malcolm was misunderstood by many white Americans because of the cultural differences. In Malcolm's case, however, the problem of understanding him properly was exacerbated by one of Malcolm's unique qualities, and that was the ability to grow radically and rapidly. After Malcolm began to travel especially, he revised his view of his religion, that is Islam. And the Islam that he came to understand, taught that you don't judge a person by the color of their skin, but by their deeds. It was during this period, that is Malcolm's last year, that the greatest changes took place. Fundamentally, Malcolm felt that African Americans needed to become an international people. He felt that the world was getting too small for us to be parochial in our concerns. As he used to say, waves that are set forth in one part of the world will eventually affect conditions in another part of the world.
Negroes in this country are beginning to realize that we are not a minority. We're only a minority in the American context. But in the worldwide context, we are part of the majority of oppressed people who are struggling against their oppressor or oppression. And this is what changes the thinking and also the tactics even American Negroes in their struggle for freedom.
One of the areas.
So, and yes, some of you have asked when I put the links to all of these in the show description. It will obviously take you to Paul's channel. There's a lot on there to peruse of not just Malcolm, but so yeah. Soon come. Just hit the refresh button or come on back, and those links will be there. But yeah, and one of the that I appreciated was that yes, I do think in the end it's not enough to overcome and recreate the dominant narrative, but it is nice to be reminded that we can see how we're being played against each other and still find ways to work together, which I thought was a good thing to be reminded of. And then one more short clip from Paul's channel relevant to today, and something I think we played early on in this series, but it's good to revisit given all that continues to go on, and even as an extension of the discussion of the Harvard reports on anti-Semitism in Palestine that we talked about on Saturdays with Renee the other day, with Jared from Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. This is again, unfortunately, still relevant.
The difference now in the direction that the struggle is taking from the direction that the struggle has been going in the past, there are many of our people who are thinking more deeply and more broadly and are beginning to see the importance of lifting it out of the national context or out of the domestic context or beyond the jurisdiction of the United States government. And the only way this can be done is by internationalizing the problem and putting it at a level where it can be taken into the United Nations, and then all of the other independent nations on this earth can involve themselves in our struggle and support us. And the only way by which this can be done, instead of it being called civil rights in the future, we're going to have to label it a human rights struggle or the struggle for human rights. And as such, we can then take it into the United Nations through the avenues that have been set up by the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. We can take our problem before the United Nations in the same manner that the problem of South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Hungary, the Arab refugee problem, it becomes a world problem. And as a world problem, then the Afro-American or the so-called Negroes have more of a chance of getting some real meaningful results, because it's not left up to the one who's responsible for it anymore, but it's put at a level where the whole world can see that our plight is wrong, and they can bring the moral support of the entire world on our side against this force that has stood in our path in the past.
So yeah.
When I bought my farm in California, everybody thought I was crazy, and then COVID hit. And now I'm out here and I'm in Africa and I'm farming and I'm living and I'm growing businesses, and people probably think I'm crazy, but I guarantee you guys, this is the most beautiful, and quite frankly, it's the best decision I've made. I'm a pioneer. This is what I do. I'm here. I'm loving it. And just keep watching.
Yeah. So the unfortunate relevance is, and if folks want to see later this morning, you can see on when that video goes fully live on my channel, you can see the discussion of a great article in Africa is a Country about celebrity pan-africanism being a new wave being led by Louise and others. But the relevance, the unfortunate timing, and I didn't even play that part, but was is that, again, the attempt, not necessarily directly related or specific to targeting Malcolm, but again, the reason Malcolm's politics are targeted is not just because they're Malcolm's, but because those politics are threatening to world power. So a radical pan-Africanism based on a United States of Africa under scientific socialism, or certainly the wherever Malcolm, whatever form, likely that, since he was linking up with Nkrumah at the time and supportive of Lumumba and Sekou Touré and so many others, that the or even as Kwame Ture used to talk about, the pre-colonial natural tendency of all societies, and certainly those in Africa, to head towards a Pan-African unity, only interrupted by European colonization and enslavement, means that the form that it takes going forward has to be determined largely by the colonizer and led by an unpoliticized or apoliticized celebrity, neo-colonial bourgeoisie. So it's really, it's kind of weird and sad and angering to go from reading about Malcolm X's internationalism to the international Pan-Africanism led by Khalees and Idris Elba and John Legend in the 21st century, after Malcolm has been assassinated and so many others, and others incarcerated and otherwise punished as well. Absolutely. So, but all right. We don't need to be angered in that way, because we can be angered in this way, which, I did not, did it again. Dang. Didn't get the timestamp right. Anyway, while I'm doing this, like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, put this in your socials. Support Black Liberation Media. Great time to support the Patreon. If for no other reason, the review crew plus guests will be joining to talk about Sinners Wednesday live at 2 p.m. and you patrons can join us. Dang, I'm sorry. I thought I had this because I really wanted to, and I don't want to spend too much time with it. But I couldn't believe when I heard this question that was asked. I'm sorry, everybody. My apologies. My apologies. All right. So let me, my bad, everybody. My apologies once again. But I just want to play. So there's a new book coming out by Ibram X. Kendi, and I think it releases tomorrow. So I don't know if we'll get to it for this series. And thank you, Josh. Thank you, Josh. But I do like to be a little more prepared, and I keep making this error. I promise you, I think when I'm pasting the link, I've done it where you hit it to the timestamp, and then But all right, here we go. But he's obviously getting the red carpet invitations. And in this interview I watched that he gave to Al Sharpton over the weekend, I it's more the question. The answer is fine. There's nothing in these. Well, let me not say that. The answers are very well styled for this setting. I'll say that. But this question that we get from Reverend Sharpton is wild.
Wanted to do this book. Now, you write about the one and only meeting between Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm in 1964. And America has sanitized King's legacy. Me coming out of the King movement, I feel they've sanitized it too much, but that's my opinion.
That was it. That was it. That was all I could take. And that's sort of my point. It's now Al Sharpton who goes on to remind us that Betty Shabazz is the godmother to his children, which I don't pretend to understand what relationship they had or how that worked. I don't know how. I can't imagine what anyone would have to navigate at the level of a Dr. Shabazz in the post assassination, having gone through all of that. I can't imagine. So I don't know what it's like. I honestly, I can't even imagine what it's like to have to try to be carrying on and reviving and keeping your husband's legacy alive and raise your children and contend with the Al Sharptons of the world. And I can easily see why one would not want to get into any kind of perceived, even contentious, relationship with a popular and ascending figure like a Sharpton. But I mean, for him, first of all, again, it reminds me of the silliness in the Harvard reports that we talked about Saturday. On the one hand, you have Harvard, acknowledging that since the 1960s, Jews and Israelis and have had an increased influence on and presence on the university, but somehow are incapable of better informing their community about the so-called Middle East. You're Al Sharpton. You're literally on, one of the remaining largest networks every week. You have a national action network. You have endless media coverage. If you really think you're in Spike Lee's film. Literally. What mischaracterization of Malcolm are you decrying? Whose narrative are you bothered by? And if it needed to be improved, why aren't you doing it? Who, as I'm going to get to, so again, I don't know what Kendi has done in that book. I'll get it tomorrow when my Kindle copy is delivered. But I just wasn't ready for that particular level of shock, to be perfectly clear. I didn't expect to get a good interview when I sat down to and press play. But that particular approach I felt was even another level of diabolicalness. Shout out to Skip Kuhn. But it's perfect because if Kendi is going to give a rebranding akin to a Sharpton, then he can, it sort of propels that effort in setting the groundwork for there have already been. So, by the way, this is a good way to lead to what will be the last clip before I get to the centerpiece, which is one of my favorite. So in 2012, we had, I think, gone to press already with our Alive Reinvention collection, I think. And there was and forgive me for doing this too, I always get there. It was one of the forums in New York. Was it the Left Forum? The People's Forum? Forgive me. The Left Forum. That's right. It's in the show notes. Okay, I did put it in the show notes. At the Left Forum in 2012 in New York, there was this big panel convened to debate Manning Marable's book. I was there, but not at this panel because I had been invited by the late Rod Bush and Charles Pinderhughes to a panel about internal colonialism. And I was honored to be asked to be there, but I really wanted to be at this discussion because it was about, we were putting this book out. The Third World Press book was being put out or came out already. And it had Hakeem Adabudi on this panel, Amiri Baraka on this panel, and as you'll hear, Bill Fletcher on this panel. Amiri Baraka has an essay in our book, which he basically summarizes on this panel. Fletcher has an essay in the Hakeem Adabudi-led book defending Marable's book. And Bill and I, at the time, had off-the-record words about this because I'll put it's already on the channel. This is just a reminder. I'll put the link in the show description for those who haven't heard. If you want to hear the whole thing, it's really fascinating. But these last 10 minutes I'm going to play is I think gets to the core of the issue, which is ideology and politics. But I do remember what Bill would do at the time, like others, would throw up these straw references to those who just couldn't handle a real investigation of Malcolm X, those who couldn't confront the realities of his sexuality or his infidelities, those who wanted to lionize him and all of this, as if there weren't any. And I remember I reached out to him directly on a number of occasions saying, who are you referencing? Send a link, quote, because you're not addressing the argument that I and others have around Marable's book, which is centered on the scholarship, the politics, not the sensational claims, although they speak to the poor scholarship. But, and I can, so when this panel happened, I'm saying, because again, to be fair, there's generations here and there's levels here. Bill could be like, Jared, the emails were just dismissive, frankly. They were just like, we don't, So I was like, but you keep saying this and you're ignoring, But he was not going to not be on a panel with Amiri Baraka and Hakeem Adabudi. So to me, so when I missed the panel, I absolutely made sure, and you are all welcome, that I got the audio. I used to be vigilant about this back in the day. Like let me get at least the audio for my radio show, for the website, for posterity. So yes, it would be great to have the video, but the audio, I was like, I gotta have it. And I'm so glad I did that. So glad I did that because the argument from 2012 is still playing out. And even just from that little clip from Sharpton this past weekend, it's still playing out. And so rest in power to Amiri Baraka, who, we had our, disagreement around Obama, and you can hear him in the broader discussion of this defending his vote for Obama. But no doubt, all due respect, rest in power, and let's check out this last few minutes of the panel.
I don't think, unless you're talking about religious people, I don't think any of us, the Black Liberation Movement never held Malcolm as a messiah. They simply thought his ideology was correct. And in terms of Malcolm's legacy, all those organizations like the Black Panthers, the Republic of New Africa, the Congress of African People, came from Malcolm's inspiration. He was the most inspirational person of that generation. So, like, what actually it seems that you're saying is that the masses of us, the people who actually followed Malcolm because we thought that he was correct, that somehow that we were like either we thought it was a religious kind of thing. And in terms of the thing about Malcolm X commodified, by whom? Who did that? You mean the media? Certainly, their commodification must have been negative. And the comment about we weren't worshipped in private, I mean, that's just gratuitous insulting. I mean, the fact that we followed Malcolm meant that we worshipped him in private. I think what's necessary is we get comments, and again, that's what I was criticizing Maribel. Well, we get these criticized by people who never agreed with Malcolm ideologically, who never thought what he was doing was correct. You understand? And so now they're gonna go around the edges of him, trimming him off in some kind of way. And that's what I mean. What we need to have is a debate on the ideology of revolution. If you want to do that, we need to bring it right straight out front, rather than, nipping at Malcolm's heels, because the question is, what ideologically do you think Malcolm was doing wrong? And also the Black nationalists might not describe Malcolm X's evolution, that Black nationalists, I don't think it's a question of Black nationalists might not, but I think people who were following Malcolm's thought, and determined to see that thought proceed past his death, it's not a question that we wouldn't be able to describe it. The thing about Betty Shabazz, again, that's like some kind of Maribel. That was what Maribel was kind of saying, stuff like that. It wasn't satisfied. How you know that? Was you in there with him? That's just out to lunch, but I just don't see that as any, unless you got proof, take photographs of. In terms of the National Black Assembly, I didn't understand what you were saying about that, because I was Secretary General of that. I would like to know what you were saying about that, what that meant. In terms of Malcolm's views being undeveloped, what would they be as developed, your view of it, see? Because I think that's what we need. We need a discussion of the ideological kind of conflict that's going on, not some kind of sideways criticism of Malcolm that's really criticizing the whole ideological development. That's what I think. We need to come out with it. You know what I mean? Because I know the Social Democrats never did dig Malcolm X. You understand? And so to pretend they dug him, but blah, 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 that's just a lot of, well, you know what you call it. So that's all I have to say presently.
Well, okay, Haki, go ahead before Bill responds. Go ahead, Haki.
I knew Dr. Betty Shabazz.
And that's Herb Boyd moderating.
Malcolm loved this woman. They had 6 daughters. And the daughters, who never really got to know their father, through their mother. And Betty, Dr. Betty Shabazz, I cannot even visualize her not respecting that relationship. We used to, when she would come up to the National Black Holistic Society, she came up one weekend, we had it on her birthday. And so the brothers had decided that we're gonna give her a present. And the present was a professional massage from Dr. Hapi, all right? She pulled me in that room and said, I'm not letting that man touch me. And again, it just spoke to the privateness of this woman and what she saw as important in terms of just maintaining and keeping the legacy of his memory alive in her life. She did go on to receive a doctorate degree. So she wasn't like some person in a jelly jar, not able to think and not able to, develop, and not able to criticize if indeed there was problems within the context of the family. Because she did go on, and the best she could do a marvelous job with those daughters until the tragedy happened in her life also. But what I saw as unnecessary is, number one, he don't know what went on between the two of them. Well, what is the purpose of it? What is the purpose of it? I don't understand it. I mean, my wife and I have been together since 1969. We have 3 children. And we have ups and downs, ups and downs. My wife's a PhD also. And so you go through problems, but you maintain and you keep this marriage going because you know it's important. And you love each other. And from what I can tell from my talking to Betty late at night, that she loved Malcolm and her daughters.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm sorry, excuse me, Mary. I don't want to sound like Robert De Niro, but are you talking about me? Talking to me? I mean, it's like this thing about criticisms around the side of Malcolm. I mean, you talking to me?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm talking about the statement you just made up there.
Right. And what I was talking about was about the nature, about whether or not fundamentally we can have a discussion about Malcolm, right? Whether or not we can look at Malcolm and look at the strengths and weaknesses of Malcolm. This is not about whether I loved Malcolm or didn't. It's not about whether I was, my just like you and others, Malcolm inspired me and has been central to who I am. But there is this reluctance to have a discussion, and it goes to this question you're raising, Haki, the purpose. No. The purpose is to understand the man, understand his motivations, understand the challenges that he was facing, to understand issues of strategy. I mean, that's what good biographies are about. It's to look at the context, look at the situations and challenges someone is facing, and ask yourself, what do you think about that? And then what are the ramifications today? This whole thing about social democracy, Amir, you got to give it up, man. I mean, it's just like, I don't know why you keep raising this about Marable.
Because it's true. Because they always end up on the wrong side.
Marable left DSA a long time ago.
He never left his mind, though. See,
to raise this as an issue just to delegitimize any formal discussion.
No, it's the question of the ideological. You can see the conflicts ideologically. It don't have to do with no personal stuff. It has to do with what they think revolution is and how it has to be approached. What you think Malcolm X was and what he was doing. Right. You understand? And it's still the same thing. What you're doing is criticizing ideologically without bringing that out to the front. Bring out the ideological conflicts. Those are where we really get down. That's what we really want to talk about.
I'm criticizing people who have decided that they, rather than have a real discussion about some of these critical issues in the book, would rather focus on Marable's intent, almost conspiracy theories that this book, I mean, this whole idea that was raised by some people, why did this book come out now? Well, let's see. This guy's been working on his book for about 15 years. You know what? I know what happened. 15 years ago, he conspired with the bourgeoisie to figure out that just at this moment,
well, who would raise that except a fool? No, nobody would ever raise something like that. That's a foolish idea.
You should reread this book, and then you'll see
which book?
This book. And then you will see some of these allegations that are in there.
Yeah.
I mean, let's
but what I'm saying is this, to say that you don't want, that you are facing people who think Malcolm as a messiah, that's like a false kind of idea.
It's not
That's
false at all
That's
when
to
we
make
can't
us
have the discussion.
metaphysicians in the beginning. When if you want to talk about ideology, bring it down. What ideologically are we talking about? Sometimes we think Malcolm is a messiah. You know, that's just
When
corny.
people say
Yeah.
that the people need icons, that is in fact exactly what they're saying. They're saying that there are individuals that should be above criticism. I don't happen to come from that school of thought. I happen to think that
Who said
human
that?
beings,
Again,
Who said
that?
individuals should be above criticism?
it was,
I don't come from that side of thought.
No.
I don't believe that at all. I don't believe it at all. I think that it's important for, and this is why we include you in the book.
This is why we include you in the book. And again, that's the Third World Press book that Haki Madhubuti and others put together that features essays from Glenn Ford, Bill Fletcher, talking about the Manning Marable book. Our book, Alive Reinvention, something similar, attempting a similar kind of project, though we would not have included an essay from Bill Fletcher. We were not attempting to even be that balanced, but to Madhubuti's credit, and Fletcher's essay was invited, and that's the book Fletcher was talking about. But if you read it, well, it's been a while. I would argue that a bulk of the criticism has less to do with the straw ideas and subjects that were raised by Fletcher but I do know I directly offered, again, what little space, what little it meant then or means now on my radio show, website. We were talking about having forums at the university. We were, I invited Bill and others to all manner of discussion and debate. And it was the defenders of Marable who would not engage. And I told Bill, I don't care. I'm not interested in the claims around, again, the unsupported in terms of evidence, but I'm not interested in the discussions around his sexuality, his infidelity. I want to talk with you about the ideas, because as Baraka pointed out, this is an ideological question. None of us were raising this stuff about conspiracies around Marable's. Again, as I keep saying, I don't want to speculate about Marable's intent or anyone's intent. I'm judging the concluded work. And if anything, especially since I've been going back to look at how capitalism underdeveloped Black America, I've been arguing all along Marable's track record doesn't comport with this final product, for whatever disagreements we might have or anyone might have. So again, I'm not trying to equate myself, but I was just, for the record, saying, like, we have university space, radio space, website space, podcast space. Let's have Zahir Ali would not engage. No one would engage. So the flip side, though, I will say, to his credit, even if it was just for that one event, kudos to Bill for showing up and being on that panel. And kudos to him for writing the essay that went in Madhubuti's book. I don't have to agree with it. At least he stood on his argument and was willing to engage a peer. I'm not a peer. At least he stood with a peer in Baraka. If at minimum, Baraka's a peer, if not, but at minimum. And I think it exposed the problem. And that's what Baraka was saying. Who is saying what you're saying? Who was making that argument? And why aren't we focused on the ideological framing? So I loved it. I love that. I'll make sure the link is in the show description if anybody wants to hear the whole thing. But yeah. All right. But as we turn to a close this morning, I do want to get to this to the centerpiece, because I really loved this article. And I even love the seeming contradiction that it's written by two men. But if you're in a country that's progressive, the woman is progressive. Black women, radicals, in the making of politics and the legacy of Malcolm X. By Kamosi Woodard and Eric McDuffie in University of Hawaii Press from 2013. So again, take a moment to get the citation. I don't want to be involved in the distribution, so there will be no link to this in the show description. I just want to avoid that for us in the platform altogether. But this is the citation. If you would like to grab it on your own. And as I said, right out the gate, a reference to Fred Sanford. Vicki Garvin often talked about the days when she tried to recruit Malcolm X, the then known as Detroit Red, into the 1940s Harlem Black Left. Garvin first met Malcolm in Harlem when he worked as a popular bartender at Small's Paradise. From that beginning, Garvin and Malcolm developed ongoing conversations about revolution and political economy that lasted from 1940 to 1964, when they had their last conversation at the Organization of African Unity Summit in Cairo, Egypt. From the outset, Garvin saw Malcolm's political promise and the leadership potential. Malcolm and his buddy Red Fox, the comedian, were down and out, but already attending meetings on the left and reading communist literature. And I admit, someone who grew up on Sanford and Son, I cannot stop laughing at the idea internally of just trying to picture specifically Fred Sanford, going to a communist meeting. You know what I mean? Workers of the world unite to bring me my ripple. But absolutely. Garvin employed him. Malcolm, why don't you stay and join the Communist Party? Nodding toward the speaker, he responded, well, if he can't speak any better than that, the young Malcolm apparently did not wish to join the Communist Party. And we've all been there. I know I've been there. I remember vividly 2 homeboys I brought to a DC statehood Green Party meeting one day, trying to recruit them to that effort. That's right. What's up, Tafari? A calm pipple. Right? I mean, it would be red, right? The drink would be red, right? Exactly. Why not, you big dummy? But that was exactly what my friends said after the meeting. They were like, Jared, we gave it a shot, but if this is how boring these meetings are and how dry these discussions are, we're gonna have to find another way to join the revolution. Ultimately, Malcolm's study of comparative revolution and socialism led him to in his last years, to try to recruit Vicki Garvin and her roommate Maya Angelou into his revolutionary circle. So the article talks about a kind of, again, a full circle there. She tried to recruit him, then he's later trying to recruit her. Malcolm's collaborations with these women demonstrate their importance to shaping his radical political trajectory. Women such as Vicki Garvin, his mother, Louise Little, who I think there's a forthcoming biography of her, and I think there's much more needs to be said about her, even just what's talked about later in this article. Betty Shabazz, Queen Mother Moore, a preeminent figure in the 20th century Black nationalism, pan-Africanism, and communism, played a crucial role in helping Malcolm develop a theory of Black self-determination, pan-Africanism, and internationalism. These women served as his teachers and collaborators. The impact of Black women radicals in shaping the life and legacy of Malcolm X continues one of the most significant gaps in the study of this key figure of the post-World War II Black freedom movement. And this is something I did not know. We'll get to in a little bit. There is that when it comes to these women, Malcolm X, the work on Malcolm X has either neglected, marginalized, or even plagiarized the voices of revolutionary women. Part of this neglect can be explained by the cursory treatment of women in the now classic autobiography of Malcolm X, published posthumously in 1965. And I will say, as some of you have heard me rail and complain about my own experience with plagiarism, suffering, watching your work get plagiarized and turned into money and success for others is infuriating. And I'm talking about at the level of a state university where no one knows my name, no one knows anything about it. It don't matter. I wouldn't be able to, maybe you would have to have the strength of a Black woman to be able to handle having your work plagiarized in the context, as we'll get to momentarily, of Malcolm X. That would be, and I will say, shout out to the there's been a handful of Black women, by the way, and non-Black women who I've heard many nightmare stories about their work as grad students ending up in the uncredited final versions of more prominent, and in one case I'm thinking of in particular, white male scholars. And them explicitly in one case telling me, I do not want to make an issue of it. I'm just telling you off the record. It's just chalking it up to the game and keeping it moving, because I don't want the smoke. I don't want the persistent, and I just don't want, and it's, wow. So, but all right, sorry for that. Forgive that. The erasure and marginality of women in the autobiography can be explained in part by the patriarchal gender politics embraced by Malcolm and Alex Haley, the writer of the memoir. At the time they conducted the interviews that served as the basis for the text, Malcolm was still in the staunchly patriarchal Nation of Islam, and he had not begun to forge a more progressive position on gender as he would after his break from the NOI. That's an important point to make. When the bulk of what ends up in the autobiography was derived from Malcolm before he left the nation. Manning Marable's recent biography, Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention. In this book, the work provides more attention to women than the autobiography and other biographies, but women still remain marginal to the story, with Vicki Garvin and Queen Mother Moore rendered completely absent. That, friends, neighbors, and as Malcolm would point out, enemies, is crazy. Okay? Crazy. And just as we're sitting here, I wish I had done it before. I'm just doing a quick word search of the Kindle copy just to confirm, and absolutely, there is not one reference in 600 pages to either Queen Mother Moore or Vicki Garvin. Not a single reference. This reminds me of how a Marable disciple, Peniel Joseph, could write a book ostensibly about the life of Stokely Carmichael and not once mention Kwame Ture's autobiography. This is the scholarship that is dominating so much of the discussion across forms of media, by the way, as these works inform documentaries and series and so on. That is, and yes, Josh was right to remind us that Rosemary Mealy's essay in our Alive Reinvention collection it makes some of these important points as well. But this is super diabolical. Given Marable's longstanding commitment to Black feminism, the absence of women's voices and the sophisticated gender analysis in Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention, is curious. Now, I'm going to hit this with a little bit of a message. Because when I read that, I even put it in a different color because I said, hold up. I said, son, I keep being dragged back to this concern I have. If the life's work of Marable is oddly distinct, I think, from what appears in this final work attributed to him And this is just yet another, because again, Marable would have known all of this. All right. So speaking of the audio we just played, the article here references the allegations in terms of sexuality in Marable's book. Bill Fletcher Jr. is an activist and defender of Marable's biography, charges that the homophobia and sexism deeply embedded in segments of the Black community explain the uproar around Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention. He convincingly argues, and this is where I do disagree with the article, Marable dared to touch on a piece of Malcolm, his sexuality, that has largely been ignored by biographers, both friend and foe. Fletcher calls on scholars and Black communities to think more openly and critically about Malcolm X's gender and Black freedom. Now, I want to be clear, I am not arguing for some sort of conspiracy theory, but as I was arguing then, and I feel to this day, and this is why, as we talked about earlier on in this series, when Wendy Wolf, the publisher, preempts, even in her own speech, remember when Dr. Burroughs and I were looking at it, she preempts or claims to be preempting in her speech about the book that, let's just get to it, his sexuality, yes, he did because I know that's going to be a big problem. What I think that they're doing there, by design, intent, unconsciously, certainly by impact, is create a situation where that becomes, again, the straw argument that allows us to avoid what Baraka was trying to get Fletcher, and I, on a much lower level, was trying to get Fletcher to acknowledge and others to acknowledge, is an ideological and political issue. I kept promising anyone I could who would hear who engaged me, I don't want to talk about those things. I don't even care. I've even said, though it's not supported by any evidence, if I'm willing to stipulate anything you want about the infidelities and the sexuality, whatever, if that will get us to a conversation about the politics and ideology and the scholarship in Marable's book. So it just feels like it just keeps playing out that way because, again, you saw it in the Baraka exchange. Who is saying this? And in Fletcher's, again, I'm happy to go back and look at it from what I remember at the time, and certainly in our exchanges and in his public exchange, he does not demonstrate with any examples who is raising a question about this. Who is he arguing against? That is Fletcher, when he's saying that the Black community's homophobia makes them unwilling to grapple. That was not what the uproar largely was about in terms of the book, at least in politicized circles. So I can't, but again, because they don't offer any references and all of that, it was hard to determine where all of this was coming from. And it was also a controversy they were helping to spark by constantly themselves focusing on it and then using that as a way to take up time and space from everything else. All right. Referencing Patricia Hill Collins, the article points out here that she explores the ways Malcolm's gender politics reflected dominant views of white womanhood and manhood applied uncritically to the situation of African Americans. However, Collins does not discuss the importance of Black women radicals in helping Malcolm X to rethink his views on women and gender. This is what I love about this article and the method and the frame it brings to this discussion. It's not saying, again, to the point Fletcher kept trying to make, the authors here are not saying Malcolm or anyone is not without flaws. What they are trying to center are the radical politics and the revolutionary women completely erased by Marable, who were advancing and helping Malcolm improve himself. As would be the case, because as everyone did remember, Malcolm was 39 at his assassination. And there are those of us, myself included, in our 50s, still struggling with some of these issues. Our primary intention here is neither to defend Marable's biography or to speculate about the political and ideological motivations driving the uproar around Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention. Rather, we are interested in tracing the rich but largely unexplored interwoven histories of Black women radicals and Malcolm X. And again, I love this. I'm not trying to get into all of that. I'm looking at the final product, assessing the work produced, not its intent, not speculating about the authors. Here's the impact. Here's the work. Here's an assessment of the work itself. That's what, and the conclusion, spoiler alert, having already said it, you erase the revolutionary women. And by extension, of course, the revolutionary ideas themselves. Appropriating autobiographical narrative form as a set of rhetorical, culturally, and historically situated strategies for shaping information and in turn shaping readers' receptions of it, Smith and Watson argue that life writing requires an audience to both confirm the writer's existence in time and mark his or her lived specificity, distinctiveness, and location, calling into question subjective truth and factual history and the perspective brought to autobiography and then also biography. These conclusions affirm those drawn about the controversy surrounding Marable's biography by Bill Fletcher. And again, I don't agree with this. He persuasively argues, unfortunately for too many followers of Malcolm, myself included, the autobiography has been treated as the word of God. Rather than appreciating the politics that accompany all autobiographies, many of us have treated this book, along with Malcolm's speeches, as the final or near final word on Malcolm the person. And my problem with this argument is that it's used to deny an appropriate focus on the politics of the person and the politics of the biographer writing about the person. I would argue that a majority of the people, and this is why it was so moving, who read the autobiography, for all that is flawed in it, what is drawn from it is the revolutionary transformation and the potential for that. It's not to use the flaws of the autobiography to regenerate our own flaws, and specifically patriarchy. So I just don't. I don't agree that the problems with how we read and frame Malcolm have to do with our inability to be critical of his flaws. I think the bigger problem is our inability to grapple with his actual politics or be allowed to or encouraged to. Reading Malcolm's autobiographical narrative and speeches, as well as prevailing biographical accounts of him as truth instead of subjective truth through the accounts of Black women, moves Black women from the margins to the center in Malcolm's life story. As Carol Boyce Davies points out, Black women have become sisters outside of the Black radical intellectual tradition, have been pushed to the outside. However, just again, as always, never fully doing it justice, not reading word for word throughout the whole article, but just trying to grab some of the encourage folks to check the citation and grab a copy. But importantly, however, by the 1930s, there was no Chinese wall between Black nationalism and communism in the United States. The political careers of women such as Vicky Garvin and Queen Mother Moore reveal that this was not the case. Similarly, while Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention, discusses Malcolm X's interest in global affairs and his international travels, Marable portrays Malcolm near the end of his life moving toward a political position that had forsaken the national question and demands for revolutionary change at home and abroad for electoral politics and liberal civil rights integrationism. So again, I laughed when I read this and I went back and read my own intro in A Lie of Reinvention, because I said, I read this, I said, wow, I said, this is again confirming my own argument about how Malcolm ends up being framed in the book, in Marable's book, but I didn't write it this well. And I didn't this professionally either. In fact, I referred to Marable's epilogue as a eulogy for Malcolm and his politics. that they were putting forever into the grave Malcolm's radicalism. But this is a far more professional writing. But it ends up saying the same thing, that you've turned Malcolm into a liberal Democrat, who I argued would be supportive of that they were saying would be supportive of Obama and Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice. So I just thought I got a kick out of that. So I love this part of the article as well, where they focus on his mother, who I'm increasingly realizing just my own myopia around what I have, not focused on in terms of her work. And I suspect that's the case for a lot of us. We're not encouraged to, certainly. But Louise Little is often portrayed, as they say here, as a one-dimensional, wretched figure. Haley's autobiography and Marable's Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention, minimize her active role in cultivating Malcolm's political consciousness. In her memoir, Ilyasa Shabazz emphasizes the importance of Louise Little in nurturing Malcolm's political consciousness. Beyond the confines of Jim Crow in 1900, Louise Langdon Norton Little was born and educated as a colonial subject of the British Empire in the Caribbean island of Grenada. In Montreal, she met an itinerant Georgia Baptist preacher, Earl Little, at an international meeting of the UNIA. In 1917, they married in Philadelphia, where they deepened their commitment to grassroots Garveyism that flowered into their organization of several UNIA divisions in Omaha, Nebraska, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Lansing, Michigan. Underscoring the need for excavating Black women's voices for reinterpreting Malcolm X's life story, Ilyasha Shabazz emphasizes her paternal grandmother's importance in laying the groundwork for her father's Black radicalism. It was grandmother Louise and Reverend Little, she writes, who sowed the seeds of insight, discipline, educational values, and organizational skills in my father, not Elijah Muhammad. Mr. Muhammad cleared away the weeds and allowed those seeds to flourish and grow. This is a significant claim. From her standpoint, it was not Elijah Muhammad, the head of the Nation of Islam, who Haley's autobiography credits as a father figure who saved the young Malcolm Little from a self-destructive life of crime and stoked his political consciousness, but Louise and Reverend Little, who were the source of Malcolm's Black radical politics. The archival record supports Shabazz's claims about Louise Little's advanced political consciousness. She was a devout Garveyite. On July 3rd, 1926, the Negro World, the official periodical of the Garvey movement, which reported news from around the globe and encouraged self-education amongst its readers, published a report by Louise Little about the UNIA division in Omaha, Nebraska. I got to go back to Professor Duncan's new book on Garvey, where she talks about, and we saw the presentation at Morgan a couple weeks ago, where she talks about the is that recorded? Where she talks about it was basically the women who ran globally the news service but the news service of the Garvey movement, keeping everybody informed of what was going on all over the world. So this makes sense. As Malcolm's earliest teacher, Louise Little was not only cosmopolitan, speaking 5 languages, but also confident, cultivating in Malcolm an immense pride in his Caribbean heritage. Ilyasa Shabazz's attention to Louise Little contrasts dramatically with Haley's and Marable's trivialization and neglect of her active role in cultivating Malcolm's political consciousness. While prevailing biographical narratives have downplayed the importance of Louise Little in nurturing Malcolm's initial interest in Black self-determination and community organizing, they have virtually erased the interwoven histories between Malcolm X and Vicki Garvin and Queen Mother Moore in forging his approach to community organizing in Harlem during the 1950s and 60s. By the 1950s, Malcolm X gravitated as a minister in the Nation of Islam toward Black women radicals such as Queen Mother Moore and Vicki Garvin, who, like him, came of age in the 30s and 40s. Their similar backgrounds explain how they found one another and forged a commitment to community organizing and Black self-determination. Furthermore, it's significant that sharing like complexions, Malcolm X, Vicki Garvin, and Queen Mother Moore led in the Black consciousness transformation of brown is beautiful into Black is beautiful. If Garvin traced her color to the family background that blended Native American and Irish in Virginia, then both Malcolm X and Queen Mother Moore spoke bitterly about the white terror of rape. It's fascinating. Ultimately, all three of them were the cutting edge of remaking an African American and pan-African identity that repudiated the color caste system by blending light and dark people.
Now listen!
Message! All of that. Queen Mother Moore often proudly shared her stories with young Black militants about tutoring Malcolm in the art of community organizing and global politics, yet these stories are completely absent in his memoir and missing in most biographical portraits of Malcolm. They talk about the influence of the Bandung Conference on all of them, Queen Mother Moore's connection to Cyril Briggs, her old comrade, and the bringing those connections into the contemporary moment. Garvin tells us that educational and occupational opportunities were limited in Jim Crow South, but access to skilled trades was perhaps more racially exclusive in the Jim Crow North, where African Americans had lost their foothold in that labor market. Talk about being in that slave line, hoping to get selected by the white women hiring for the day. But that's an interesting point that I think is often misunderstood, particularly in today's circulation of the Black capitalist narrative, this idea that really there has ever been a foothold anywhere in the labor market. But these stories demonstrate the need for scholars to dig through the archival boxes of Vicki Garvin and other Black women radicals who collaborated with Malcolm X to discover alternative narratives that challenge dominant myths about him. While there are many parallels between the lives of Malcolm X and Vicki Garvin, there are also some important contrasts. Vicki Garvin was older, born in 1916 as opposed to 25 for Malcolm X. She had sort of the great benefit, it says here, of love and support of both her parents to sustain her throughout the painful ordeal of poverty in Jim Crow North. If Manning Marable suggests that Powell's People's Committee was the paradigm for Malcolm X's vision of the political promise of the Nation of Islam, then he neglected to examine the leading role that Vicki Garvin played as the architect in developing the Harlem paradigm for the organizing tradition. Right. Grounded in that economic ordeal, Malcolm X, Vicki Garvin, and Queen Mother Moore came of age as leaders in the golden age of grassroots organizing tradition in the Jim Crow North. Veterans like Vicki Garvin had built groundbreaking organizing ensembles since the legendary days of the Harlem Boycott Movement and the phenomenal People's Committee that propelled Reverend Adam Clayton Powell into the New York City Council and U.S. Congress. Legend has it that when Reverend Powell discovered that the communists had recruited Vicki Garvin, he stormed into their Harlem office. "I know that you want to take my best organizer. Can't we share her?" But she was developing the Garvin paradigm that attracted Malcolm X's study, developed several important dimensions that propelled the Black revolt from protest politics toward an alternative radical political culture in the Jim Crow North. For one thing, the Garvin paradigm was based in the Black spiritual movement, strengthened by the powerful infrastructures of the Black church. And that model organized street protests that unleashed the power of disruption from Harlem to downtown Manhattan, protesting discrimination in employment, housing, and public policy. Second, the Garvin paradigm used that phenomenal community infrastructure as the foundation of an independent political movement that could run its own political candidates, as well as use its bullet votes to endorse or reject the candidates of other parties. Third, the Garvin paradigm developed a newspaper, the Harlem-based People's Voice, an instrument for political agitation and mass education. This is not entirely different from George Jackson's Big Three, now that I think about it. Not as aggressively stated, but somewhat similar. Develop an alternative political culture, an independent political party or movement, infrastructure, and an alternative press. If Manning Marable is correct in his proposition that Malcolm X followed his Harlem paradigm, then as he flowered in his leadership in the Harlem Mosque, then our research agenda must follow the veteran women who were at the cutting edge of that organizing tradition. By the 1950s and the Cold War, class tensions were heightened, and Malcolm X took aim at these next targets in his classic speech, Message to the Grassroots. Malcolm X also founded the Muhammad Speaks newspaper as agitator, organizer, and educator of the Black Revolt. Again, the late great Askia Muhammad would challenge that claim about the foundation of the paper. But Malcolm certainly sought to transform its use for sure, as he did his internationalist politics. Malcolm's autobiography and Marable's Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention, give mostly cursory attention to those internationalist politics, an examination of, and of course, because he ignored, they completely erase. I can't even believe that. As critical as I am of that book, how can you completely not mention these names in 600 pages about Malcolm X? An examination of the oral histories and lesser-known biographical narratives and archival sources of Black women militants such as Queen Mother Moore, Vicki Garvin, and others demonstrates that they must be credited in transforming Malcolm's third worldist outlook. Also, Malcolm's internationalism and global travels were critical in prompting him to reject the patriarchal gender politics of the NOI and to adopt a more progressive gender politics in the final months of his life. Queen Mother Moore claimed that she and her younger sister, Louise Moore, schooled Malcolm in the importance of Africa to the African-American struggle for self-determination. Louise trained Malcolm. It wasn't Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm didn't know nothing about Africa. Eloise taught Malcolm about Africa. And I can tell you that when I wanted to talk to Malcolm about Africa, he couldn't mention the word. He told me before he could even say the word, it would have to come from Elijah Muhammad. So I told him, make an appointment for me for Elijah. And he made it. And I went to Chicago and I talked to Elijah. And I spent 3 days in his home across the breakfast table, him and I arguing about Africa. He didn't want to hear nothing about Africa. We had to teach Malcolm, you hear, that that's how he was able to get a new insight, put that to work. Fascinating. This is quite a story, but it is absent in Haley's autobiography and in dominant narratives about Malcolm X. Queen Mother Moore's remembrance not only frames herself rather than Elijah Muhammad as Malcolm X's teacher, but also blasts the head of the Nation of Islam for his disinterest in Africa. In its religious teachings, the NOI referred to the African American as the Asiatic Black man. This perspective not only rejected Africa as the ancestral home of Black Americans, but also embraced many of the dominant culture's pejorative views of Africans as backwards and uncivilized. Eloise Moore's lived experiences as Black women facing multiple oppressions, together with their backgrounds in the Black left, which had developed a sophisticated internationalist outlook informed by Black nationalism and communism dating back to the 1920s, may explain why their position on global affairs was more advanced than Malcolm's. That is, Queen Mother Moore and Eloise Moore's lived experiences as Black women facing multiple oppressions. Similarly, Malcolm X had encounters with Grace Lee Boggs, a Chinese-American radical activist intellectual based in Detroit, and her African-American husband, James Boggs, an auto worker, journalist, and radical activist, were important in transforming Malcolm's global vision. His call for revolution and international solidarity defied the Nation of Islam's non-engagement policy and otherworldliness, underscoring his search for answers outside the organization. Meanwhile, Black women's roles in shaping Malcolm's internationalist thought was most evident in their encounters with him in Ghana in May of 1964. We've already covered Maya Angelou's versions of this and talked briefly at the beginning of the show about Betty's interpretation of this a little bit. But it's important to be reminded that a lot of this was born out of the work of revolutionary Black women, including again, Maya Angelou, Vicki Garvin, and Alice Wyndham. Looking back on her life, Wyndham asserts that her passionate concern for racial equality prompted her interest in Africa and the Nation of Islam, which ultimately led her to path crossing with Malcolm X. Like him, she was reared in the Midwest. She became radicalized as an undergraduate and graduate student. Although she joined neither the NOI or the Communist Party USA, she moved easily between Black nationalist and Black leftist circles. She eventually made her way to Ghana. Upon hearing of Malcolm's pending arrival in Ghana, these women, with the assistance of Puerto Rican Dr. Ana Livia Cordero and her husband Julian Mayfield, along with Marxist writer Leslie Lacey, formed the Malcolm X Committee. In his memoir, Malcolm also lauded the veteran Black radical Shirley Graham Du Bois, a confidant of Nkrumah, for taking him under her wing and discussing the militant Pan-African politics of her late husband, who had passed away the previous year. His conversation with Nkrumah convinced him that Pan-Africanism was the key to realizing freedom in the African diaspora. And again, it was funny to see how Maya Angelou got upset with Shirley Graham Du Bois for moving too slow in embracing Malcolm and setting up that meeting with Nkrumah. So that's wild. As the historian Deo Gore, forgive me if I've never gotten quite clear how to pronounce her name, and I do appreciate her work very much, convincingly argues, Garvin's description of these women as mother hens is revealing in terms of how African American women radicals negotiated the complicated politics of gender and nation in Ghana. On one level, the description captures how these women adhered to the prevailing tendency in Black diasporic politics that framed the discourse of motherhood as the only viable means through which women could enter the public sphere and make claims to social justice and women's rights. The description reinforced women's subordination and patriarchy. At the same time, mother hens and musketeers, as they also self-referred, transgressed normative gender roles of their day. As Gore writes, the term mother hens reflected an effort to mark Garvin's role as a knowledgeable elder, a role long gendered as male within the Black liberation movement, while musketeers conjures the masculinist image of a soldier. As Wyndham and Garvin recalled years later, Malcolm encountered both women again overseas when he returned to Africa in June of '64. Garvin met him in Cairo while he attended the OAU summit. It was the last time she saw him. She was en route to Mao's China. Since both studied comparative revolution, she invited Malcolm to join her to learn more about Chinese revolution. However, Malcolm suggested he was not going to make it. Still, he made her promise that she would return to Black America to teach the next generation after learning firsthand about the revolutionary experience. And we talked about that in terms of Malcolm's diaries and a little bit in Maya Angelou's book about his interest in making sure that folks didn't just stay in the diaspora and came back to support the Black struggle here as well. I also thought it was interesting that given her relationship with Emperor Selassie, that Malcolm asked Alice Wyndham to set up a meeting with the emperor, and Selassie refused because he didn't want to upset his relationship with the United States, which is deep. Malcolm's unsuccessful efforts to meet with Claudia Jones during his visit to London in early 1965 provide another example of him seeking out Black women radicals and his burgeoning identification with Third World. Unfortunately, just before he arrived, Claudia Jones passed away, so he made sure to take a picture. Tragically, Jones died only weeks before Malcolm arrived in London. Once there, he took an affectionate photo holding her portrait. Underscoring the ways women of color were sometimes ahead of him on political matters, due in part to his encounters with them, Malcolm came to reject the Nation of Islam's patriarchal gender politics and began to adopt a progressive gender outlook that appreciated women's status as the barometer by which to measure democracy at home and overseas. One thing I came to be aware of in my traveling recently through Africa and the Middle East, in every country you go, usually the degree of progress can never be separated from the woman. If you're in a country that's progressive, the woman is progressive. But in every backward country, you'll find that women are backward. So one of the things I became thoroughly convinced of in my recent travels is the importance of giving freedom to the woman. And I'm frankly proud of the contributions of our women, the contributions our women have made in the struggle for freedom. And I'm one person who's for giving them all the leeway possible because they've made greater contribution than many of us men. It is pointed out, it's pointed out here, as does Patricia Hill Collins, that this language, despite an advance of some sorts, is still patriarchal. The idea that men can give women freedom, that they're still our women and things of that nature, so Malcolm was still evolving, and this article does acknowledge that and references, again, Patricia Hill Collins' critique of that. But again, it centers that critique in his engagement with revolutionary Black women and his evolution. So again, to challenge even this article's own support for Bill Fletcher's argument, it's contradicting that argument by, again, showing that the revolutionary politics that Marable, and by extension Fletcher and others, want to diminish or take out or decenter in favor of his flaws, shortcomings, or differences, sexuality, and or whatever with his infidelity. This article is saying, no, we're not saying Malcolm was perfect. We're saying we want to center the revolutionary politics, and particularly the revolutionary politics of the Black women who were advancing Malcolm in his own development. That is an appropriate way to engage a critique. To claim, as Fletcher and others have done over the years, that those of us who are critical of Marable's book don't want to engage a critique of Malcolm X is disingenuous. That's the straw argument. For example, Black women radicals informed Malcolm's decision in his final years to frame the African-American freedom struggle as a campaign for human rights, not civil rights, to appreciate Jim Crow and white racial terror as forms of genocide as defined by United Nations human rights declarations, and to petition the UN for redress. Black women radicals were in part responsible for this undertaking. Queen Mother Moore shared with Malcolm the history and initiatives of W.E.B. Du Bois and the Black communist leader W.L. Patterson during the early Cold War years to bring the United States before the United Nations. Malcolm's strategy for taking the United States before the UN provides another example of his turn toward the radical left. Malcolm boldly took sides with the U.S. Black left and Third World revolutionaries, rejecting Cold War anti-communism and imperialism, while, as this article points out, many others in the movement were afraid to do so as this country became more anti-communist and more engaged in the Red Scare. Many people, unlike Malcolm, ran from those politics in the left. Malcolm, like the firefighter running to the proverbial fire, runs towards the flames. If women of color are mostly absent in prevailing biographical narratives of Malcolm X's life, they also remain largely invisible in studies that seek to explore the making of his legacy following his tragic assassination at Harlem's Audubon Ballroom on February 21st, 1965. Yuri Kochiyama, a Japanese-American radical who had befriended Malcolm years earlier, jumped out of her seat and rushed towards him on the stage of the Audubon Ballroom as bullets struck him. Again, that's wild to be reminded of that. Woman, man, whomever, bullets start flying, and not ducking, not running, not you run towards the person who is the target of all those shots. That's additionally commendable. His sister, Ella Collins, who had supported her sibling for years, stepped into the head of the OAAU soon after his passing, and under her leadership organized the first pilgrimage to Malcolm X's grave on May 19th, 1965. While in China, Vicky Garvin gave a speech that was supposed to commemorate Mao Zedong's in support of Afro-American struggle against violent repression speech. And she turned it into a eulogy of sorts of Malcolm after he was assassinated. Garvin said, "Our deep love and respect for and sincere appreciation to Chairman Mao, the world's revolutionary leader, for his recent statement of encouragement and firm support of Afro-American struggle. There's abundant evidence that the American blacks have linked their own struggle with that of the world's revolutionary peoples, especially in Vietnam, and the slogan, 'Hell no, we won't go,' is common rallying call against a common enemy." So again, it's deep that in the years after Malcolm's assassination, in part because of his politics, you have a black community being more resistant, and also because of obviously a anti-Vietnam War protest, but you have a black community being more resistant to going into the military. You later have the man credited with giving us the dominant biographical film about Malcolm X, Spike Lee, who in the early 2000s was hired and brought in to make recruitment videos for the Navy targeting black and brown people. And I know you all in the remix chat, if nowhere else, are following me here. I think there's a wild and crazy overlap and parallel there. Of course, personally, Garvin befriended the legendary black militants Robert and Mabel Williams, who, as we've talked about, have their own overlap politically and personally with Malcolm X. Now, this is where, as earlier mentioned, I don't think I've ever known this or remembered this. I would hate to think I would have forgotten this, so I have to think that this is my first learning of it. But as mentioned, Vicky Garvin, there was plagiarism involved with this, and Vicky Garvin apparently was herself plagiarized by Alex Haley. That, as the authors here write, black women radicals played an important role in the knowledge production of Malcolm X's political and intellectual legacy. However, this role remains largely invisible in Malcolm X's life story. The autobiography provides another example of this omission. A detailed 6-page single-space letter written by Alice Wyndham about Malcolm X's sojourn to Ghana served as the basis for Alex Haley's discussion in the autobiography of Malcolm X's Ghana trip. Alice Wyndham to Christine. She penned the missive within days of Malcolm's departure from Accra and mailed it to friends back home. Haley acquired a copy of the letter. Several paragraphs of Wyndham's letter appear almost verbatim in the autobiography. However, he did not credit her. This move speaks not only to black women's importance in keeping Malcolm's legacy alive, but also to the exploitation of their intellectual property by black male scholars and the erasure of their vital role in the production and dissemination of Malcolm's life and politics to the public. This is scandalous, especially given what is now understood to be Haley's plagiarism of Roots, Haley's concoction with Equatorial Guinea of this fake story so that they can have a cottage industry creating a tourist business and financial benefit, exploiting the histories of enslavement and the desire of Africans in the diaspora to find a connection home. It's scandalous at the level of Marable's book being told to us to be what is meant to supplant, replace, improve upon Malcolm X's autobiography as the go-to standard for understanding Malcolm's history and life, which doesn't correct this and then doubles down on it by not mentioning Vicky Garvin at all in 600 pages. So not only did we not get from Marable's book all that we had been hoped and told we were going to get in terms of what was missing from the autobiography, but he doesn't even put in the Alice Wyndham piece. He doesn't mention Vicky Garvin or Queen Mother Moore at all. That's deep. Now, Alice Wyndham is mentioned in Marable's book, but I don't. But this corrected record is not. There's even reference to the letter from Wyndham to her sister Christine, but it's not made clear. I'll double check, but it's not made clear that Marable's book, or that Haley's book plagiarized Wyndham. And then that correction is not clarified in Marable's book is the point I'm trying to make. At least I don't think so. I'm happy to be corrected on that, but it's still scandalous. No woman was more important in keeping Malcolm's legacy alive and raising his children than Betty Shabazz. Widowed, Shabazz raised the couple's 6 children, including twins who were born after their father's assassination. This was no easy task. She wrote her dissertation on the education policy of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, so I did get it from this article. She commuted between New York and Western Massachusetts while she worked as a nurse, volunteered at UNICEF, and raised her children. She sadly died in 1997 as a result of suffering serious burns due to a fire in her apartment sparked accidentally by her grandson, who bore his grandfather's name and who himself was killed, 10 years ago? Ilyasha Shabazz's biographical portrait of her mother's relationship to her husband differs from Marable's and Malcolm X's A Life of Reinvention. In contrast to Marable, Shabazz neither mentions marital discord between them nor discusses her father's alleged homosexuality as a young man. Now, again, we could understand why this might be. We could also understand why a historian objectively researching might have that included. But again, it doesn't even rise to the level of allegation. If you look at how it's written about, it's never even recognized to be referenced or proven to be a reference to Malcolm himself at all. So it's in her eulogy, I believe, Garvin eulogized Queen Mother Moore and pointed out that Moore anticipated Robert Williams' advocacy for armed self-defense and Malcolm's famous call for blacks to struggle for self-determination by any means necessary. Garvin would die more or less 10 years, I think, after Queen Mother Moore. For life writing scholars interested in Malcolm X and the growing field of Malcolm X studies, these women's stories illuminate the centrality of Black women radicals to Malcolm's politics, life, and legacies in ways that counter accepted truths about this leading 20th century Black nationalist leader. Haley and Marable erase and marginalize the significance of Black women radicals to Malcolm X, as well as these women's brilliance as thinkers and activists, as well as the ideas with which they worked, I would add. To be sure, these women provide an occasion for reinterpreting Malcolm X's life story, the history of Black radicalism, and Black women's history. Telling new stories requires scholars to consult these women's histories and lesser known sources. So again, shout out to McDuffie and Woodard for this 2013 article. If you're in a country that's progressive, the woman is progressive, Black women radicals and the making of the politics and legacy of Malcolm X. Please do as you wish, find this online and have a read on your own if you like. It has been wonderful to revisit and bring to this series, 100 Years of Malcolm X. So, all right, everybody. Big salute to the Undefeated chat for joining me here live this morning. To those who will see and hear this later, salute to you as well. Please do like, share, subscribe, put this in your socials, invite others to join this discussion. Support the Patreon if you can. This is a good time to support this collective effort that we have going here, if for no other reason, in addition to all the other good work that you get and specials that you get over on Patreon. You will get this Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, a live discussion with the full review crew and special guests about the film Sinners. It will be a discussion unlike you've seen or heard anywhere else about that film. Please continue to support this 100 Years of Malcolm X series. We will conclude next week with our own set of special guests as we celebrate the 100th birthday of Malcolm X. And as the AAPRP say, Africa must unite, pan-Africanism or perish, peace only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. Thanks again, everybody. Again, this has been another wonderful exploration for me. Selfishly, it's therapeutic as well, cathartic as well. I hope you all are enjoying it. I hope the rest of your Monday only gets better from here. Please come back tomorrow for the full week of Remix morning shows all week long. Plus, if you have the bell rung, you won't miss all the other great offerings that continue to roll out on this platform. So, all right, everybody, let's go stretch and hydrate. Enjoy some of this sun. Again, peace only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And I'll catch you. Ooh, got a review of this coming up too. But catch you next time right here for more.
What did you sacrifice? Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, have set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything, 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 everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.